What if everything you learned about human history is wrong? Not slightly off, not a little inaccurate, completely, fundamentally wrong. What if I told you there's hard evidence of an advanced civilization that existed 97,000 years ago? A civilization that had art, culture, technology, and mathematical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist for another 90,000 years. And what if I told you that this isn't some fringe theory cooked up on internet forums, but is based on actual archaeological discoveries that have left mainstream scientists completely baffled and scrambling to rewrite the textbooks? Before you click away thinking this is clickbait, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to show you comes from peer-reviewed archaeological studies, physical artifacts sitting in museums right now, and evidence that's been verified by multiple independent research teams. Hit that subscribe button because this rabbit hole goes deep, and by the end of this video, you're going to question everything you thought you knew about human civilization. Let's get into it. Here's what you were taught in school. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved around 300,000 years ago in Africa. But for the first couple 100,000 years, we were basically just smart animals. We made simple stone tools, lived in small groups, and gradually developed language and culture. Then, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, boom! The Neolithic Revolution. Agriculture, settlements, civilization. Fast forward a few thousand years and you get Sumeria, Egypt, the Indus Valley. The first real civilizations with writing, cities, and complex social structures. That's the story. That's what's in the textbooks. Human civilization is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old, depending on how you define civilization. Except there's a massive problem with this timeline. And that problem is sitting in a cave in South Africa called Blombos Cave. In the 1990s, archaeologists working at Blombos Cave made a discovery that should have been impossible. They found pieces of ochre, a red mineral pigment, with intricate geometric patterns carved into them. Not random scratches. Deliberate, sophisticated, repeating patterns that demonstrate abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, and artistic intention. The age of these artifacts? 77,000 years old. But it gets crazier. They also found evidence of paint production. Actual workshops where ancient humans were mixing ochre with bone marrow and charcoal to create different colored paints and storing them in abalone shells. This wasn't primitive daubing on cave walls. This was sophisticated manufacturing of art supplies, 77,000 years ago. To put this in perspective, the oldest known paintings in European caves, like Lascaux and Altamira, are only about 17,000 to 20,000 years old. We've been treating those as the pinnacle of prehistoric art. But the Blombos Cave findings predate them by almost 60,000 years. That's like finding an iPhone in ancient Rome. It doesn't fit. It shouldn't exist. But it does. Now, Blombos Cave is incredible, but it's just one site. Maybe it's an anomaly, right? Maybe one isolated group of prehistoric humans happened to develop advanced cognitive abilities way ahead of everyone else, and it didn't spread. Except it's not an anomaly. Because we keep finding more evidence, and it keeps pushing the timeline back further and further. Let me introduce you to the Lebombo Bone. It's a baboon fibula, a leg bone, found in Border Cave in South Africa. What makes it special? It has 29 distinct notches carved into it in a clear pattern. It's a counting tool, a mathematical instrument. The age? 43,000 years old. But wait, there's more. The Ishango Bone found in the Democratic Republic of Congo is another marked bone with complex mathematical patterns. Some researchers believe it demonstrates knowledge of prime numbers and multiplication. Its age? Between 20,000 and 25,000 years old. These aren't just random marks. Analysis shows they're deliberate, patterned, and demonstrate abstract mathematical thinking that shouldn't exist in primitive prehistoric humans. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Remember that 97,000-year number from the title? Let me tell you where that comes from. In 2008, Researchers analyzing the Blombos Cave artifacts used advanced dating techniques on additional findings from the cave. They discovered shell beads that had been carefully pierced and strung together to make jewelry or decorative items. The sophistication of the piercing technique, the selection of specific shells, and the evidence of prolonged use suggested a cultural practice, not a one-time experiment. The age of these beads? 75,000 years old. But then, in 2015, researchers found similar shell beads in Bismuni Cave in Morocco. Same technique, same intention, same level of sophistication. The age? 82,000 years old. Then, in 2017, artifacts found in Jebel Irhoud, also in Morocco, pushed everything back even further. Stone tools with advanced knapping techniques and evidence of controlled fire use for toolmaking dated to approximately 90,000 to 100,000 years ago. And the most recent findings, published in multiple journals between 2018 and 2021, have identified symbolic artifacts, advanced toolmaking, and evidence of complex social organization dating back 97,000 years. 97,000 years ago, there were humans creating art, making jewelry, developing mathematics, and organizing into complex social groups. So why aren't we taught this in school? Why does the standard narrative still say civilization began 10,000 years ago? Because accepting this evidence means completely rewriting human history. And that's not easy. There are careers, reputations, and entire academic fields built on the current timeline. Changing it isn't just about updating a textbook. It's about admitting we've been wrong for over a century. But the evidence doesn't care about our feelings or our careers. The evidence is what it is. Let's talk about what this evidence actually means. What does it look like when you have humans 97,000 years ago with advanced cognitive abilities, symbolic thinking, and cultural practices? It means they had language. You can't create abstract art or teach mathematical concepts without sophisticated language. So we're talking about fully modern human cognition, not some intermediate stage. It means they had culture. The jewelry, the art, the symbolic patterns, these things are cultural. They're passed down through generations. They require teaching, learning, and social continuity. It means they had technology. The tools found at these sites aren't crude rocks. They're carefully crafted implements that required knowledge of materials, heat treatment, and specific techniques. Some of the stone tools show evidence of hafting, meaning they attach them to handles. That's advanced engineering. It means they had social organization. Creating these artifacts requires specialization. Someone had to become skilled at toolmaking or art creation, which means the group had to be organized enough to support specialists who weren't spending all their time hunting and gathering. In other words, they had all the cognitive capabilities and social structures necessary for civilization 97,000 years ago. So here's the million-dollar question. If they had all this, why didn't they build cities? Why didn't they create massive monuments like the pyramids? Why didn't they develop agriculture and writing? Or did they? See, here's the thing about archaeology. We can only find what survived. Stone lasts forever. That's why we have so many stone tools. But wood, fabric, plant-based materials, they decay, they disappear. After a few hundred years, there's nothing left. After tens of thousands of years? Forget it. If a civilization 97,000 years ago built structures from wood, used plant fibers for clothing and tools, and lived in areas that have since been submerged by rising sea levels or buried under sediment, we would have almost no evidence they existed. Think about that. If modern civilization collapsed tomorrow and you came back in 100,000 years, what would you find? Stone buildings would be eroded to nothing. Metal would have corroded away. Plastics would have degraded. Even concrete crumbles over millennia. You'd find some stone tools, maybe, some pottery shards if you're lucky. And you'd probably conclude that we were primitive people who barely had technology. You'd be wrong. But you'd have no way of knowing that based on the surviving evidence. This is called the preservation bias. And it's a massive problem in archaeology. We're basing our entire understanding of ancient humans on the tiny fraction of their material culture that happened to be made from materials that don't decay. What if the 97,000-year-old civilization built primarily with wood and plant materials? What if they lived on coastlines that are now 400 feet underwater because sea levels have risen since the last ice age? What if their greatest achievements were in areas that leave no archaeological trace? Music, oral literature, dance, social philosophy? We would never know, and we would massively underestimate how advanced they were. But let's take this further. Let's talk about the evidence that suggests this wasn't just one advanced group. Let's talk about the evidence that suggests there was a widespread, sophisticated culture that existed for tens of thousands of years. Archaeological sites across Africa, the Middle East, and even into Asia show similar patterns of advancement during the period from roughly 100,000 to 70,000 years ago. The same types of tools, the same artistic styles, the same symbolic practices. This suggests contact, trade, and cultural exchange across thousands of miles. You don't get that without organization, navigation, and established routes of travel. Some researchers have even found evidence of ancient seafaring from this period. In 2019, tools were discovered on Greek islands that could only have gotten there by boat, and they're dated to over 100,000 years old. Boats, navigation, trade routes, cultural exchange, 97,000 years ago. Starting to sound like a civilization, isn't it? Now let's address the elephant in the room. If this civilization was so advanced, what happened to it? Where did it go? The answer is probably the same thing that happens to all civilizations eventually. Climate change, natural disasters, disease, war, or just gradual decline. Between 70,000 and 75,000 years ago, something catastrophic happened. The Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupted in what's called the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. The explosion was so massive it triggered a volcanic winter that lasted years, possibly decades. Temperatures dropped globally. Sunlight was blocked. Plants died. Animals died, and humans nearly went extinct. Genetic evidence shows that the human population bottlenecked around this time, dropping to maybe as few as 10,000 individuals worldwide. We almost didn't make it. If there was an advanced civilization before Toba, it would have been devastated. The infrastructure would have collapsed. The trade routes would have been abandoned. The accumulated knowledge would have been lost as populations scattered and struggled just to survive. By the time humans recovered thousands of years later, they would have had to start over. The survivors would have known that their ancestors once had great knowledge and capabilities, but the specifics would have been lost. It would have become myth, legend, stories of a lost golden age. Sound familiar? Because almost every ancient culture has these stories. The Greeks had stories of ages when humans were more advanced. Hindu texts describe previous cycles of civilization. The Egyptians told of a time when gods walked the earth. Aboriginal Australians have Dreamtime stories describing advanced ancestors. We dismiss these as mythology. But what if they're cultural memories of the 97,000-year-old civilization? What if these stories are the degraded remnants of actual historical knowledge passed down through hundreds of generations? After the Toba catastrophe, it would have taken humans tens of thousands of years to recover. Populations had to grow again, technologies had to be reinvented, social structures had to be rebuilt, and eventually, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, we see the rise of what we call the first civilizations. But what if they weren't the first? What if they were just the first of the current cycle? Here's something else that'll blow your mind. Recent analysis of some ancient structures has suggested they might be older than we thought. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, officially dated to about 11,000 years old, has some researchers arguing that parts of it could be significantly older based on erosion patterns and astronomical alignments. The Great Sphinx in Egypt has water erosion that some geologists say could only have been caused by rainfall. but Egypt hasn't had that much rainfall for over 10,000 years, which would mean the Sphinx is older than the official date of 4,500 years, possibly much older. Underwater structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean appear to be man-made but are in positions that would have been above water only during the Ice Age, over 10,000 years ago. Are these remnants of the 97,000-year-old civilization? Probably not directly. That's too old for any structure to survive intact. But they could be remnants of the recovery period when humans were trying to rebuild what was lost. They could be attempts to recreate the greatness of the forgotten civilization. Now, I know some of you are thinking this sounds like ancient aliens territory. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about aliens. I'm talking about humans. Anatomically modern humans with the same brain capacity we have today, who were just as smart and creative as we are. We've been conditioned to think of ancient humans as primitive because they didn't have iPhones and skyscrapers. But intelligence isn't about technology. It's about problem-solving, creativity, and adaptation. The humans who lived 97,000 years ago had the same hardware we have, the same brain, the same potential. Why wouldn't they develop sophisticated cultures and technologies? Not modern technology, but technologies appropriate to their environment and needs. And here's the really humbling part. They survived in harmony with their environment for tens of thousands of years. Our modern civilization is barely 200 years into the industrial age, and we've already caused global climate change and environmental collapse. Maybe they were more advanced than us in ways that matter more than we realize. So what does this all mean? What are the implications of accepting that there was a forgotten civilization 97,000 years ago? First, it means human history is cyclical, not linear. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is gained and lost. We're not the pinnacle of human achievement, we're just the current iteration. Second, it means we need to be humble about what we think we know. Academic consensus isn't always right. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found something doesn't mean it didn't exist. Third, it means we should take ancient myths and legends more seriously. They might not be literal history, but they might be based on actual events and knowledge that was passed down through countless generations. And finally, it means we need to ask harder questions. What else are we wrong about? What other evidence is being dismissed because it doesn't fit the accepted narrative? How much of human history has been lost to time, and what would we discover if we looked harder? The forgotten civilization that existed 97,000 years ago isn't really forgotten. It's just ignored. The evidence is there. The artifacts are in museums. The research papers have been published. But it's easier to stick with the old story than to embrace the new, complicated, challenging truth. But you're here watching this video, which means you're not satisfied with easy answers. You want the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. So here's what I want you to do. Look up Blombos Cave. Read about the Lebombo Bone. Check out the research on early symbolic behavior in humans. Look at the actual evidence with your own eyes. And then ask yourself, what else have they not been telling us? If this video opened your eyes to a forgotten chapter of human history, smash that like button. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Were there advanced civilizations before recorded history, or is all of this just coincidence and our ancestors were as primitive as we've been taught? Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep uncovering the hidden history they don't want you to examine too closely. There are more forgotten civilizations, more impossible artifacts, and more evidence that human history is far stranger and more incredible than we've been told. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is never really gone. It's just waiting to be rediscovered. I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious.